Joy, wolfw-m-n, has been participating in, co-creating, and facilitating group psychedelic experiences in rural and wilderness settings since 1984, and doing so in specifically queer settings since 1990. This presentation will detail the history of these communities in psychedelic ceremony, how they are co-created and structured, and how they have specifically helped queer and trans people integrate and heal from traumatic personal and cultural experiences, as well as have deeply spiritual experiences. Many of the communities referenced developed rituals with psychedelic exploration in the face of the AIDS epidemic and its impact on marginalized cohorts. They will discuss the use of psychedelics in processing grief, both personal and collective, as well as the incorporation of psychedelics into the death experience. Also explored are adaptations that can be made to accommodate a widely variable range of ceremony participants, 300 to 600 people, grounded in localized community culture and intention. Joy, wolfw-m-n, is an autodidact, hospice priest and caregiver, chaos magician, witch, radical fairy, entheo guide, counselor, and psychonaut. They are queer, trans, Filipina, and Romani. She has been traversing psychedelic pathways for 36 years, starting out this journey within the West Coast Grateful Dead community in the mid-'80s, exploring multiple avenues of experience and landing in connected communities in which psychedelic exploration is considered invaluable in personal development. Joy founded the Holy Order of the Epicene, a spiritual order for people who live and worship outside the polarized spectrum based on spiritual structures and who are committed to a life of service. The order supports members in need while they are called as caregivers around the world and helps maintain the Tranquillition Memory Queer Pagan Library in Oakland, California. So Joy, welcome to the stage. Joy, wolfw-m-n.
Which one?
This one should work. Testing? Does this one work?
Testing, yes. Testing, that one works, yay. Hello, hello, hello. Hi, my name is Joy, wolfw-m-n. My pronouns are, please don't use the same one twice in a row. And I do that specifically because there are so many people who want to be allies and are afraid of misgendering someone. I want people to not worry about being wrong, but they still have to think about it. That's the important part. As you can tell, I wear my weird on the outside, and I have great respect for people who wear their weird in whatever way is the most comfortable for them. The word weird comes from an old Saxon word, W-Y-R-D, which just means the path that you walk in life. And so I embraced weirdness at a fairly young age. One of my very first mushroom trips, back when I was, remarkably young, I did the thing that they always tell you not to do. I looked in the mirror. And instead of melting, which is what everybody warned me would happen, is my face would melt and I'd freak out and it'd be really bad, my face started sprouting. And I spent most of my adolescence and my young adulthood really not wanting to be alive. I was hospitalized for the better part of 2 years for being a suicidal, angsty teenager. And realizing, having that moment of seeing my face sprout and all of a sudden I was covered in plant, was realizing that being alive and growing is a good thing, and I needed reminders of that. And when I discovered the Green Man mythology, when I was doing my research when I was just a baby witch, and realized that there's a god that represents that, all that is wild and growing, and that he became one of my primary deity figures that I work with. And so it kind of explains everything. Tripping around with the Grateful Dead taught me a lot. Getting to trip with 40,000 people and feel safe was an incredible experience. And then I met the witches, and the witches do very, very intricate and somewhat strict psychedelic rituals. The circles that I was with, we would cast circle, we would all dose together, and nobody left the circle until everybody had had their experience and everybody was back. And we all just took turns taking care of each other. And that's what prepared me for when I found, enough with being discreet, for when I found the fairies. And with the fairies, it was the ability to combine those two experiences. And my first time doing one of the collective mushroom experiences with the fairies, I was having an absolute meltdown, and I found a gopher hole in the meadow that we were in where we had danced the maypole and done all the traditional Beltane things, and just started screaming into it. And out of nowhere, to me, since all I was looking at was the hole in the ground, I was lifted up and I was suddenly in the lap of like 5 or 6 different fairies, most of whom I didn't know. And then one fairy that I did know and who shared a ritual practice with me came and just started tapping lightly on the center of my back between my shoulder blades. And I had stopped crying and I was like, oh, there are other people, I need to like compose myself and everything. And as the tapping got harder and harder on my back, I broke and started sobbing all over again, and this time there was no holding it back or worrying about what other people thought, or was I harshing somebody else's trip because I was crying. And they just held me. And Maxine, the one who was beating on my back, was like, you're home, welcome homo. And I had never heard those words before and had them mean anything. And so to have that, welcome home here in that context was one of the most incredible and healing experiences of my life. And I knew that I had to make sure that those ceremonies continued. So I immediately went and I found the elder queen who had been making the tea and done the whole ritual. And I'm like, I need to know how to do this. And he was a lovely, genteel elder queen who taught me about not only all of the measurements and the weighing and the things and calculating and what you do, but also taught me about, the energy that you put into it. And even when you're stirring a vat of tea or a cauldron of something, be conscious of what shapes or designs you're stirring into it, and be conscious of every moment that you're touching it. And I've been doing these for about 30 years now. And the space where I go traditionally for Beltane anyway, we usually have about 200 people. And it works because it's a whole community, and it's a whole community that has this long-standing practice. It's not the case where I could just go and, rent a retreat center and go, I'm gonna make mushroom tea for 200 people. It's like we're all doing it together, and there's a whole fleet of people who are allies who wear fancy bows and ribbons to identify themselves. And they go around and they check on everyone as we're all there in this meadow together, singing and dancing and drumming, and then everybody falls down and lays there and goes, oh, wow. And then comes back up, and there's more singing and drumming and dancing and all sorts of fun. It's very different than some of the therapeutic practice that a lot of y'all do. It's much more wild. And to me, it's a type of healing that only really comes when there's dirt involved. Because what happened for me as I lifted my head up after sobbing my whole existence out into the lap of these queens who were holding me, was I looked up and I saw the way that many of us do on, whatever our sacrament is, all of the energetic lines of connection. It was the first, I'd seen graphs before, I'd seen walls breathe before, and geometric patterns in clouds before, but this was the first time I saw the web of connection. And I had a visual of those energetic lines that connect us to each other and to everything, and the root systems and the mycelial systems and every leaf on all the trees surrounding. And for the first time ever in my life, I saw myself as part of it. Because growing up queer and trans in a hardcore fundamentalist family, all I got through my entire childhood was reminders that I wasn't right and that I didn't belong. And to finally feel that belonging, like, wait, there are lines here, they're connecting to me. I see that. And so when we're doing these rituals now, there's a bunch of us that are carefully keeping an eye and monitoring what's happening with everyone in the field. And if somebody's having that beautiful breakdown moment, we're there and we hold them and let them know it's okay and they can fall apart, and we'll be the container for that. And then hold them while they put themselves back together. I mean, I always carry what I call my flask of psychic chicken soup with me. And it's just like, here, just be. Because that's the hardest thing in the world to do, is to just be. And to be able to hold so many of these kids. And I use kids very specifically in this context. It does not, for me, necessarily mean chronological age, but it's more of an experiential thing. Like, is this their first time at a fairy gathering? They're kids. And I had this one beautiful, beautiful experience with this older, lovely trans woman who came out into both her queerness and her transness in her 50s, after having been a straight guy construction worker all of her life. And to be able to hold her and say, "Welcome home, sister," to her, and watch her just melt into herself with that. It's like there's nothing more rewarding. There's nothing that's more precious and magical than that moment when somebody realizes that, oh wait, I belong here. Who I am inside of here, inside of the meat suit, belongs here. And for me, that's a lot of what psychedelics is about finding that space where we can both be everything that we are, because we're all incredibly complex beings. And as queers, I can pretty much guarantee that there's been at least some level of trauma in our lives, either directly or adjacent. And there's not a lot of healing out in the world for that. I mean, there's more now than there was when I started doing this kind of thing in the 90s. And for that, profoundly grateful. For all of you all that are therapists that work with people around these issues, thank you from the very base of my soul, thank you. Because I couldn't deal with going to school and getting all the paperwork and the letters and everything like that. I decided I will opt for going to seminary. It's much easier. I don't have as many restrictions on what I can do. And when I'm doing this kind of work, especially if I'm doing individual work with anyone, I make sure that they have a therapist already lined up, because that part's not my job. That's not what I'm trained at. But I am experienced and skilled at creating a container where people can have that healing experience. And that's pretty much that, and taking care of people while they're dying. And those two things are my life work. And being able to integrate psychedelics into people's death experience has also been an incredibly, incredibly powerful experience for me, and informed a lot of the way that I look at life. One of my dear friends in the leather community, back before protease inhibitors were a thing, and we were still just dealing with AZT, and all of 6 months that gave you as a life extension. He wanted to do the whole final exit thing with the bag and the rubber bands and the everything. And we set it up, and then he was like, "I think I need some LSD for this." And we gave him his requested dose. And he sat there in a full lotus position, which I am not going to attempt to replicate because I'd hurt myself. And, had the whole thing with the thumbs under the rubber bands and everything, and then got this beatific smile on his face, and took his hands out and folded them into one of the prayer mudras and put them in his lap, and kept chanting until the meds kicked in and he just drifted. And it was one of the most beautiful deaths that I'd ever had the privilege to be part of, to watch him just consciously go into it in such a relaxed fashion. Was like, yeah, there's no point in being afraid of this. And, you know, shortly thereafter, I was back up at one of the spaces where we do this kind of work, and I had taken a heroic dose of mushrooms just for myself. There were other people on the land, but I was doing primarily my own thing. And there's this one maple tree that's about 300 years old on the land. It's the biggest tree on the land, and we call her Grandmother Maple. And I ended up laying down face down underneath her and exhaled. And as I exhaled, my body began to disintegrate and go back into the earth. And I just kept exhaling. Well, at the time, it felt like forever. It was probably like 3 or 4 minutes. And was almost completely dissolved and was like, wait, this is what it feels like? This is awesome. I like this. And was like, and it touched back to my days of suicidal ideation. It's like, oh, this is what I was aiming for. Great. And I just kept exhaling, and then I have described it as my last 2 functioning brain cells collided, and there was a spark of intelligence from that. And remembered that I had a 13-year-old kid back at home. It's like, oh, wait, no, can't do that to her. That's not fair. And was like, well, what happens if I inhale? And so I started breathing in, and it all reversed itself. And I just sort of very slowly reaggregated into my body, into my brain, into me. And I was like, oh, and I lifted my head. And one of my partners at the time was sort of trip-sitting me, and they were sitting there, and they were on their knees, and they were very pale, and their eyes were wide, and they were like rapid breathing. I'm like, what? And she was like, you stopped breathing for like 10 minutes. And I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can do that again. And face planted back in the dirt and did it again. And that was the moment that I was like, I have absolutely zero fear of what death is, and I have absolutely zero desire to rush that. And that was when I actually felt like I had fully put down my suicidal ideation. And I got up, and, you know, I'm a big queen, and was able to go skipping around in the meadow. My back complained to me later, but was like, wait, I'm really, really alive now. I'm like consciously alive and back in my body. And it was a very precious moment. And I calmed my girlfriend down. It's like, no, it's okay, I'm fine. I may do it again, but I'm fine. And there needs to be more spaces where people can have those kind of experiences. There needs to be, I mean, I totally get the apartment with the Zen decor and the minimalist furniture and the 5-rhythm soundtrack playing on the Sonos system quietly in the background. And laying, you know, with the blindfold and the talking through everything. And that's because there aren't enough spaces where it's safe to really go into that kind of wilderness. And part of my mission is to create more of those spaces and to bring people to those spaces where they can have those experiences, where it's not contained in a box of cement and iron, where it's grass and trees and no straight lines, if possible, as far away from the sounds of civilization as we can get. I mean, can't do much about planes and flight patterns, but, you know, not a good thing to do next to a freeway, basically. And, here, hang on, I can only sit for so long. And creating those spaces, it's not as difficult as we might think. There are these spaces around, and there are now, at least here in California, beginning to be a couple of retreat centers that are doing that specifically, that are inviting entheoguide practitioners and their clients to do solo sessions, and also inviting small groups to come and do group ceremonies together, like I used to do with the witches. And that is so friggin' beautiful to see it happening and trying to make it happen. I know that Mia mentioned the Holy Order of the Epicene, which is the spiritual order that I founded in 2008. And Epicene is the English word that comes the closest of any word in the language I found to describe myself. And epicene means that which exhibits characteristics of both genders, yet is neither. And that's the best thing I found. I have a personal grudge against the term non-binary because I refuse to identify by what I'm not. And I will identify by what I am. And I love it that there is a word that's in common usage now, and I feel kind of like it's going to go the way of the term sexual preference, which at one time was the right phrase to use, and now is like vaguely old-fashioned and kind of problematic. And 30 or 40 years from now, non-binary may be the same way, and the people who are now gloriously embracing non-binary will have the same moments that I've had around, oh, wait, trigger warning, I will probably say something in the next 10 minutes that will offend you. Please know that is not my intention, and I'm using the language that I trained myself to use when I came out in the era of Queer Nation and ACT UP. And we called ourselves trannies and faggots and dykes. And so now that tranny is a bad word, you know, and I have a little sort of like, get off my lawn moment sometimes, as I adjust the onion on my belt. And somebody got it, thank you. And so those of you who gloriously embrace non-binary, I'm just letting you know somewhere 30 or 40 years from now, you'll probably have that same get off my lawn moment at the people who think that that term's out of date. Part of the damage that we go through, not just as queers, but as humans in this particular country and in this particular age, is that we've been separated from nature, most of us. And that is soul-killing, in my opinion. That is like, if I couldn't have trees and dirt and, you know, somewhere where I wasn't looking at all straight lines, I'd be even more nuts than I am, and I'm pretty crazy. I like to say that I am a very high-functioning crazy, and that, you know, I may be high maintenance, but I'm also very high yield. So, but that separation from wilderness, that separation from the spirituality of the earth, has caused so much damage, and so many people are healing that, as well as healing the damage that we've gone through just for being who we are, or the damage that we've gone through from having to pretend to be something we're not. And finding places where that freedom of expression is allowed is part of why fairy gatherings for me are also so precious, because it was with the witches and the fairies that I learned how to be everything that I am and not have to hide 90% of myself away while I wore boring clothes and worked at a boring job. And it's kind of indescribable, and yet I see a lot of nodding and people like going, oh yeah, that's really important. And I just want to encourage everybody, you know, at some point, remember, go out and trip in the woods. Go out and trip in the mountains. Go out and, you know, find a group of people that you can feel safe and committed with and work with them in that. It's, you know, and have the one thing that I will, like, you know, accept in the wilderness thing is, at the end of it, it's nice to have a decent sound system, because there's got to be dancing and celebration and joyousness involved in it. If we can have a whole team of really good drummers, that's great, but there's not always a whole team of really good drummers, and so if we want to augment that with a little, like, solar electricity powered something, you know, that's friggin' awesome. How many people here have gone tripping out in a completely natural environment? Oh, awesome. How many times have you done that alone? Okay, hold fingers, whatever. So there's a moment in that, and when I'm taking people out for wilderness trips, I will be with them for the majority of the time, and then at some point, I sometimes just sort of fade back into the bushes, which fortunately I have protective coloration to do that. And the Greeks had not just a word, but they had a god for this kind of moment. And the god is Pan, and the word is panic. Because that moment when you have stepped away from all the trappings of civilization and you are there in the wilderness alone, that's when you meet the god Pan and you completely freak out. And it's that total meltdown moment that happens, and it's like, what's happening? Where's the world? Where am I? What's going on? And if you know that ahead of time and know that that is the energy of the Lord God Pan, then it's easier to breathe through it. And part of my practice is to let people like have that moment and then come back and just sort of help create a container around them so that they can reassemble themselves. And like I said, I'm also really specific with clients that if we're doing this, you have to have a therapist already lined up. 'Cause not my job. I'm doing my job over here. I have one story which will probably horrify at least half of you. So let me preface this by saying that the person I was doing this particular session with was someone that I knew very, very intimately well. And we had worked together off and on in several different modalities for over a decade. And it was absolutely the right thing to do at the time. And so what happened was we were there for a gathering and doing a ceremony that's known as the Stag King, which is lifted from British and Western European Celtic tradition. And the Stag King was basically the sacrificial stag and represented all that was part of the masculine energy of the world. And my friend had been chosen. We did a king cake version of choosing. We baked a cake, there was a ring in it. Whoever got the ring in their piece of cake was the Stag King. And he got it, and he was a trans man. And it was really powerful for him to realize that he would be carrying and representing the energy of the entirety of masculine for this group of people. And he asked me to do this trip with him during the day before the evening ceremony to get ready for that. And so we dosed on LSD, and he took 3 hits and I took 5, because 500 mics for me is when everything starts to feel normal and everything makes sense. And we were walking around, and we walked into what is known as the Grandfather Grove, which had an old growth fir tree, and then a ring of smaller trees around it, and was a place that was very potent and had a lot of magic done there. And he was in that very resistant space where everything's itchy and the grass isn't right, and no, stop singing because you're off key, and all these things. And then his legs started going like this. And like I said, I knew him very well, and I knew that it would work. And my last conscious thought was, I really hope he's okay with this. And I body checked him into the fir tree, and just full-on body slam, WWE move. And he like hit the tree and then just sort of crumpled and started sobbing. And I like wrapped my arms and legs around him and was just rocking him and saying, just feel it, just feel it. And all of his insecurity about his masculinity, all of his fear of somehow fucking up being a man because he had somehow fucked up being a woman, all of that just came pouring out of him in sobs and screams and anguish. And I was just holding him, and he was looking up through the branches of the tree, and they started giving him messages. They started spelling things out with all the intricate patterns and overlaps of the branches. And the sobbing subsided, and he just kept breathing in, and I grabbed a small piece of resin off of the bark of the tree and just held it under his nose. And I'm like, smell this. This is your grandfather. This is, the masculinity that's being passed down onto you and into you that you carry in an exemplary fashion. And, it took him a bit to reassemble himself. And I just held him as long as he needed it. And every now and then we had to have what I call a chiropractic moment. It's like, this is really important and my back is going to be fucked up if I don't move. So let's adjust just a little bit. Because those things are important. That's also my safe word in any scene. Chiropractic moment. And I would not have done the body slam if it had been anybody but him. But he and I knew each other, and we knew each other from the leather community as well as the fairy community, so I felt pretty okay with what it was, and just really, I was fairly certain it would work, but there's always that one voice that's like, what if you fuck it up? And I didn't, and he really appreciated and knew that, I needed to have my body pushed. If I had had a flogger with me at that time, I might have gone that route, but I think he needed the actual impact because he needed to shatter. Because if there's one thing that we're all really good at is building our own walls. We learn how to do that when we're queer, when we're trans, when we're weird. We build really good titanium walls, and it takes something really intense to bring them down. And last year, when we were doing our Beltane celebration, we do that by inviting everyone who's coming to the ceremony to bring whatever mushrooms they have, and then we put it all in one big pot. And I always tell people the tea will be as strong as we make it. And then I remind them that a true magician can get drunk at the sight of a glass of water, so don't be bitching about it. And we actually had so much donated that I had to talk to the team that was putting the tea together and that would be serving the tea. And it's like, okay, if we use all of this, then everybody in the meadow is going to lay down and the sky's going to open and they're going to see insert deity name here. And are we ready as a community to take care of that? And we all looked at each other, it was like, nope. No, we're not. So we pulled about a quarter pound out, and that was saved. No, we got a lot that year. And so we pulled about a quarter pound out of it, and really glad we did that because we were told by pretty much everybody that it's never been that strong before. And my housemate said, I made it as far as my tent, and then I had to relearn how to be human again. And I'm like, so it worked? She's like, yeah, it was great. There's so much to be learned from the dirt. There's so much to be learned from the different plants. I've been known on various trips to crawl around through the dirt and sniff every single plant that's different. It's like, what does this one smell like? What does this one smell like? But nope, poison oak, nope. And, there's another space where these kind of things happen where they routinely have 600 or 700 people. And I've priested there once, and it's quite the event. And it's incredibly chaotic, and I identify as a chaos magician, so I have no problem with chaos. And the one year that I was there, everybody was on different drugs, and everybody had dosed at slightly different times. And so there was not any real full-on unification until the ritual started. And then we were dancing the maypole and dancing and everything. And after that first energetic period, everybody fell into big cuddle puddles all with each other, cuddle piles of 20 people or so. And everybody's laying there and relaxing. And when the energy started picking up, one of the queens had set up a DJ booth and a sound system. And he was playing very low-level music, psychedelic chill kind of stuff. And then he put on the Blue Danube. And as almost one being, all the fairies stood up and started waltzing. And so there's these queens, some of them in intricate drags, some of them covered in mud, more than half of them naked and just with decor in various appropriate spots. And everybody was waltzing, and it blended into another classical piece, which turned into fairy freeform ballet. And it was this beautiful unity out of the chaos. You know, the chaos took everybody to that place where suddenly we could all dance together and everyone be on time. And I didn't know that many fairies knew how to waltz properly. There was a moment at one of the earlier gatherings, and one of the other things that, you know, again, if this bugs anybody, I'm sorry, but I have a spawn, a daughter, and she went with me to all of these things, and she made it a point when she was a kid to run around and just mess with people while they were tripping. She would like find the sparkly scarves and run around and wave them in people's faces and throw glitter on them, which I still do. And then she was about 16, and I was like, well, what are you gonna do for this? And she said, I think I'm gonna drink the tea this time. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, take care of yourself, and you're gonna be with your friends, and I'm not gonna interfere with your trip, because I'm very, very opposed to parents running their kids' trips. I know a lot of hippie parents that have done the, I'll take you on your first trip, and none of the kids that have gone through that have had a good time, at least the ones that I've talked to. And so she went off and was with her friends and drank the tea, and I let her have her space. And then later, after the ceremony, I was sitting in one of the smoking areas, and she comes running up to me. She's like, Mom! I'm like, what? She's like, magic is real. It's in my head. Damn you. And then went bounding off across the meadow. And I was like, oh, my little girl's growing up and doing psychedelics. I'm so proud. And her growing up around that has made her a really amazing person. Although I have to say, all of this political stuff about how they're trying to prevent their kids from knowing who we are, that we exist, they are all going about it the wrong way. They are being really stupid. If you tell teenagers they're not allowed to know something, that's what they're going to aim for. I raised my child with like all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll possible, and she's now in a monogamous marriage and is the head of HR in a biotech firm. I'm like, you know, the only thing that makes me go, where did I go wrong, is she doesn't like chocolate, and I don't understand that. I think that's most of what I have to say, so if there are questions or, you know, opinions or anything like that.